Next on our exploration of objectivism is the fourth branch of philosophy, politics. Politics is defined as the branch of philosophy concerned with the principles and practices governing social organization and the proper role of government in human affairs. It seeks to answer fundamental questions such as, what is the real purpose of government? What is the best form of government? And how should rights and freedoms be protected? The branch of politics is often where people first discover Ayn Rand's ideas. It often serves as an entry point into her broader philosophical system. However, it is often ignored that objectivism, as we've seen, is a complete philosophical system rather than just a collection of political or economic ideas detached from any philosophical foundation. Unfortunately, this misconception often leads people to confuse objectivism with libertarianism, which, unlike objectivism, doesn't have the same deep philosophical roots. In my personal journey, I flirted with various ideologies, some of which I'm honestly too embarrassed to mention, and I eventually found myself gravitating toward libertarianism for a little while. This was primarily due to its economic viewpoints, which resonated with me. However, as I looked deeper, contradictions and inconsistencies started to surface. For instance, libertarians are divided on so many issues like abortion, foreign policy, religion, etc. These disparities showed a lack of cohesive philosophical backbone, making libertarianism inadequate for me. This eventually led me to objectivism, which offered the robust and coherent framework I was seeking. Everything we've discussed so far in this video culminates in this moment. The principles we've explored in metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics all constitute the base and the justification of objectivist politics. If you've agreed with the principles of previous branches, then logically you should also agree with objectivist politics. And that, my friends, as we'll see, essentially makes you a capitalist. The main principles of objectivist politics are 1. The primacy of individual rights. 2. Government as the protector of individual rights. 3. Laissez-Faire Capitalism as the only ethical system. 4. Collectivism as the existential threat to individual rights. And 5. Rational self-interest as the basis of a virtuous society. The concept of individual rights is central to objectivist politics, as it lays a foundation for capitalism, a system that honors and safeguards personal freedom and sovereignty. But what are rights exactly, and where do they come from? According to Ayn Rand, rights are moral principles defining and sanctioning a man's freedom of action in a social context. So this means that rights emerge from the ethical principles that we explored in the previous segment, and that they serve as the essential bridge between individual morality and the social system in which we live. Rights are what make humans live harmoniously in society. It's important to understand that rights are not granted by some god, government, or society. Instead, they emerge from the very nature of human beings, or in other words, from the facts of objective reality, and as such, they are irrefutable. Once again, if someone ever tells you otherwise, run for the hills, because it means they can and will violate your rights when they feel like it. Every single violation of rights in history was ultimately justified by the idea that it was the will of God, the government, or society. As we saw in the previous segment, ethics provides the principles necessary for an individual to live a fulfilling life based on reason, productive work, and respecting the rights of others. Rights are necessary conditions for a person to act on their rational judgment, thus enabling them to live successfully and happily. This is rooted in the ethical principle that one's life belongs to oneself, making the pursuit of one's own values and happiness both possible and moral. Individual rights originate from the requirements for a person's life in a social context. For an individual to live and thrive among others, certain freedoms must be inviolable. Freedom to think, to act on one's judgment, to pursue one's own life and happiness. These freedoms form the basis of individual rights. Therefore, rights are conditions of existence that a rational being requires for their survival and flourishing in a society. As we now know, reason is man's only means of survival. We don't rely on instincts like animals do. To survive and thrive, we need to think, to use our minds. If we don't, we die. We don't instinctively know how to hunt, build shelters, cook, etc. These things need to be learned. But thinking alone won't serve us much. For it to fulfill its purpose, it needs to lead to concrete actions in the world. For example, one can come to the rational conclusion that one needs to work to support his own life, but it won't amount to anything if those conclusions don't lead to actions in the outer world, such as actually working. Those self-generated actions taken in the world by a rational individual are vital for his survival and happiness. He alone is responsible for his survival and his enjoyment of life. Therefore, his actions in the world should be protected, and that's what rights do. When an entity such as an individual, a group, a state, a government, etc., uses force against an individual, it denies him the possibility to live according to his own nature, as a human being, because it prevents him from using his rational faculty to sustain his own life. It's the equivalent of forcing a squirrel to renounce living on instincts. Not only would this kill the animal, but it also violates the fact that for the squirrel to live its life as a squirrel, it needs to rely on instincts. And just as the squirrel's instincts are vital for its survival, so too is a human's ability to think and act freely crucial for theirs. Therefore, any form of coercion that restrains an individual's freedom to act on their reason to judgment doesn't just hinder their survival, it assaults their fundamental nature. In other words, any policy, act, dictate, law, regulation, etc., infringing an individual's sovereignty and freedom to act is therefore fundamentally evil. Once we understand where rights come from, we necessarily understand that there cannot be such a thing as collective rights. The notion of group rights, be it gay rights, trans rights, women's rights, or workers' rights, misunderstands the fundamental nature of rights. There are only individual rights, which every human being possesses by virtue of their nature, not their group identity. The concept of collective rights is an error because rights are inherently individual, and they apply universally and equally to each person. Furthermore, the idea of economic rights, like the right to a job, free education, healthcare, or housing, contradicts the principle of individual rights. Implementing these so-called rights necessitates violating the actual rights of others. For instance, providing free healthcare or education requires compelling some individuals to provide these services or funding them without their consent, infringing on their rights to their own life, liberty, and property. The primacy of individual rights in objectivist politics paves the way for a society where the government's role is to protect these rights. It champions a system where every individual's autonomy and freedom to act on their rational judgment are respected, laying the foundation for a virtuous society based on rational self-interest. Now that we've established the vital importance of individual rights for our survival and flourishing, the next logical question arises. What is the proper role of government in this context? According to Ayn Rand, a government's sole duty is to protect those individual rights. But what does this actually look like in practice? Imagine the government as a referee in a soccer game. Just as the referee ensures that the game rules are followed for a fair match, the government ensures that people play by the laws of society. This means protecting you from anyone who tries to harm you, cheat you, or steal what's yours. It's about keeping you safe from bullies, both within your own country and from outside. The government's role is to protect you from the initiation of force by providing a police force, a military, and a court system, and that's it. Let's break it down a bit. Firstly, the police are like the protector of our daily peace. They're there to protect us from criminals who might rob us, defraud us, or harm us. They're the first line of defense in safeguarding our rights to live safely. Then there's the military, which serves as our defense against foreign threats. Think of them as the wall of a fortress, keeping invaders at bay so that we can live our lives without fear or external aggression. And what about when people can't agree and disputes arise? That's where courts come in, acting as impartial judges to hear both sides of the story and resolve conflicts based on fair and objective laws. Whether it's a disagreement over a contract or a property boundary, the courts help ensure that justice is served, respecting everyone's rights. Beyond these roles, protecting us from harm, defending our country, and resolving our disputes, the government should pretty much stay out of the way. It shouldn't tell us how to run our businesses, what to do with our property, or make decisions for us that we can make ourselves. Why? Because when governments start doing more than protecting our rights, they automatically end up violating them instead. For example, if the government decides who can start a business or what prices should be, it's not just infringing, it's taking away our freedom to make those decisions based on our own judgment and hard work. That's why a government that sticks to its fundamental role of rights protection by maintaining a robust police, a strong military, and an impartial court system is key to a free and thriving society. Now, considering the government's only purpose is to protect individual rights, the following question emerges. Which social system aligns perfectly with this principle? The answer is laissez-faire capitalism. What exactly is laissez-faire capitalism? It's an economic system where all property is private and where the market operates without any government interference, allowing people to exchange goods and services as they please. This means no control over the economy, no regulation of business, no redistribution of wealth by the state, and no coercive taxation. Capitalism is the only ethical economic system, primarily because it upholds the freedom of individuals to make their own decisions, engage in voluntary interactions, and hold private property. In this system, the government has one critical role to protect individual rights, period. Take the Industrial Revolution as an example. Though not fully capitalist, it was a period of tremendous growth and innovation, largely fueled by the principles close to laissez-faire capitalism. Entrepreneurs and inventors had the freedom to think, create, and build, leading to advancements that significantly improved lives. It's a testament to what's possible when individuals are free to pursue their own interests and contribute to the market. Now, it's important to clarify that we do not live in a capitalist system today. Unfortunately, that's a misconception that many people continue to hold on to. Our current arrangement is a mixed economy, blending certain elements of capitalism with significant government intervention, regulation, and control. In fact, the vast majority of our current socio-economic issues are caused by government intervention in the economy, not the lack of it, as many activists would like you to believe. One notable example of this are regulations in the banking sector, which has given rise to our debt-based monetary system, characterized by the creation of counterfeit credit. This system causes boom and bust cycles due to the artificial credit expansion without the backing of savings or tangible assets, leading to unsustainable growth phases that inevitably crash, inflicting significant economic pain. Additionally, the reliance on fiat currency, money without the backing of physical commodities but declared as legal tender by governments, distort the free market's natural functions. Issues ranging from inflated asset prices to soaring debt levels can all be linked to such government intervention. To remedy these systemic issues, a thorough reevaluation of the government's role in the economy is imperative. Rand insisted on a strict separation of state and economics, much like the separation of church and state. She believed that the government should have no hand in controlling the economy, regulating businesses, or redistributing wealth. The reason for this is because government intervention creates an environment where different pressure groups in society fight one another in order to get special treatment or privileges from the government. This concept extends far beyond just economics to include areas like education, science, and healthcare, where Rand advocated for freedom from state control or influence. Innovation and progress flourish best in an environment unencumbered by government interference, where the creative and productive energies of individuals can be unleashed to their fullest potential. Now, in a free society, how, you may ask, can government be adequately funded to finance its operations if it's prohibited from enforcing economic regulations and coercive taxation? First, it's important to understand that the government in such a society would be substantially smaller, necessitating far less funding than current levels. If spending was limited to funding the police, the military, the court system, and the legislature, the size of government could be reduced by as much as 95%. Such a reduction would correspondingly decrease the funding required by an equal measure. There are many voluntary methods for funding government functions essential to protecting individual rights. These include lotteries, voluntary contributions for specific government services, fees for government contracts and services rendered, such as the legal settlement of disputes and property registration, and perhaps the creation of public lists where the tax contributions of every citizen are made public, thereby creating social pressures to contribute. This approach ensures that the government remains funded, albeit in a manner that respects individual choice and freedom, keeping the government's size and scope minimal. Ironically, in a truly capitalist society, which often faces criticism for supposedly favoring the rich, it's the wealthiest citizens who would end up contributing the most under a voluntary funding system. This is because their self-interest in sustaining a stable rights-protecting legal framework for their business dealings naturally motivates them to invest in government's protective services. Given their expensive commercial activities, wealthy individuals have the most at stake. They stand to lose considerably if the government fails to uphold and protect rights. This scenario aligns with what many on the left advocate for: higher contributions from the wealthy. Yet, it unfolds naturally in a laissez-faire system without the need for coercion. In essence, laissez-faire capitalism embodies the freedom to think, create, and trade without government intrusion, ensuring that society progresses through the voluntary and beneficial interactions of its members. It's a system that respects individual rights not just in theory but in practice, particularly in the economic decisions that shape our lives and futures. This is why laissez-faire capitalism isn't just an economic preference, it's the only ethical choice. Now, to no one's surprise, we are unfortunately very far from achieving a free and prosperous society, because today's prevalent political philosophies are deeply rooted in collectivism. For Objectivism, political philosophies like collectivism, socialism, and statism constitute a major threat to individual rights and freedom. These systems inherently infringe upon the autonomy of the individual by relying on coercion and force, demanding the sacrifice of some for the supposed benefit of others, which, as we saw in the segment on ethics, is morally indefensible. Collectivism sacrifices the individual in favor of the group. It suggests that the individual's rights and desires are secondary to the collective's needs. This philosophy fundamentally conflicts with the notion that each person's life is their own, that it's an end in itself, rather than a means to fulfill the desires of a group. By advocating for the surrender of individual will to the whim of the collective, collectivism directly opposes the essence of human dignity and freedom. Socialism and statism further expand on these principles, enforcing them through government power. They promote the redistribution of wealth, not through voluntary trade, but through the coercive power of the state. This is not just an infringement of property rights, but an assault on the very principle of justice. Justice rewards individuals based on their actions and merits, not their needs or their ability to appeal to collective authority. The moral critique Rand levels against these ideologies is profound. She sees the coercion at the heart of collectivism and socialism not simply as a political error, but as a deep ethical wrong. Sacrificing individuals for the sake of others is not noble. It's a negation of value in human life. True morality supports and uplifts individual achievement, creativity, and freedom, not as concessions to be granted by society, but as inalienable rights. Thus, Objectivism acts as a barrier against collectivism, advocating for a society where individuals are free to pursue their own happiness, free from the coercive dictates of any collective ideology. In essence, it affirms the moral worth of the individual and their right to live for their own sake, unburdened by the demands to sacrifice for others. This opposition to collectivism is not just political, it's a fundamental stand for the sacredness of individual life and liberty. Now, what will society look like once capitalism has been fully established and the current parasitic system replaced? Ayn Rand gives us a glimpse of what is possible. A society grounded in the values of rational self-interest and the unwavering respect for individual rights would inherently be a virtuous society. Within such a framework, every person would have the liberty to seek their own happiness, a pursuit that naturally fosters innovation, fosters progress, and cultivates a culture of mutual respect among citizens. This notion of ethical egoism, central to Objectivism's ethical theory, seamlessly transitions into its political philosophy. Rand argues that when individuals operate from a place of rational self-interest, making choices that best serve their long-term happiness and well-being, within a system that champions individual rights, the result is a society that not only thrives economically but also excels in ethical conduct among its people. This is because rational self-interest discourages the short-sighted parasitic or coercive behaviors that can arise in systems that neglect individual rights. Also, Rand asserts that a society based on rational self-interest naturally aligns with the principles of justice and merit. It's a society where individuals are rewarded for their contributions and innovations, where transactions are consensual and benefit both parties, and where each person's success is achieved not at the expense of others, but through their own effort and creativity. In such a society, the pursuit of one's own rational self-interest acknowledges the equal right of others to pursue theirs, leading to a harmonious and prosperous community. The essence of Rand's argument is that a society structured around the recognition and respect for individual rights, powered by the engines of rational self-interest, is not just viable, but virtuous. It's a society where ethical interactions are the norm, where individuals thrive, respecting the mutual boundary of rights, leading to the greatest overall prosperity and ethical standards among people. Now, to conclude this segment on objectivist politics, I want to stress the fact that this virtuous society that would be brought about by laissez-faire capitalism is not a utopian fantasy or a distant, unattainable dream. It is the political and logical culmination of principles grounded in reality. Ayn Rand has shown us that such a world is not only possible but vital. We can and must fight for this world because it represents the peak of human potential, where freedom, innovation, and ethical conduct are not mere ideals, but the very fabric of everyday life. It is within our reach to create a society that truly honors the dignity and worth of every individual, making the fight for such a future not just necessary, but a moral imperative.